Everyone, so I am currently preparing myself to take the Java SE8 Oracle exam for their certification, and I think a lot of times the best way to learn is to teach. So what I'm going to be doing is practically teaching myself on each different section that is going to be covered on this exam, and hopefully I can better prepare myself to take this exam and also potentially help someone else prepare themselves to take the exam as well. So the first part we're going to be talking about today is defining the scope of variables. Now, the first thing that we need to know when we are understanding the scope of variables is that there are three different types of variables in Java. So there are local variables, instance variables, and class variables. The first one I want to go over is local variables because they're the most constrained variables and they have the smallest application throughout your project. Local variables are defined in a function and cannot be accessed outside of their code block. So right quick, I'm going to do an example of how a local variable works. I defined a quick method that just concatenates a couple of different strings onto an input string. Within the main block of our program, I have written a string that just says here's a string, and then it runs it through the method that I've defined, the local variable string. So what's going to happen is the string that I've written within the main block, here's a string, is going to be processed into this, and it is going to be concatenated onto string in with the word with, and then that is going to be concatenated with local variables, and then it is going to return that string. What you have here are two different local variables. N and M are both local variables. Essentially, the entirety of their lifespan happens within this block of code once this is run. Once this is processed, right here, NW will exist, but everything that's happened within this method no longer exists once the life cycle of this method is complete. The next two types of variables have much more in common with one another than local variable and either of them do. So the other two types are instance variables and class variables. Here's an example of an instance variable. It's just a public string instance variable, and I've just written in it, this is an instance variable. So the way that this works is it can be used anywhere in this class, and it's not static. It has the same life cycle as the objects it's being referenced in. If it's being used in a child class, it exists as long as the child exists. And each instance of this class, if I were to make a child class of this, it will have a copy of this variable that exists as long as the life cycle of that particular instance of this class exists. Each one gets their own individual copy that can be used and modified throughout all of the different classes. And the final variable type is going to be a class variable. So a class variable has the same instance among all objects of the class. It doesn't change amongst the instances of the class, and finally, it exists as long as the project itself exists. So the way that we define this is by defining it as static. Static just means that it's steady throughout every single class within a project. So if I were to come over here in my project and go to part 2 and say, for instance, reference this variable, it would still be the same exact variable, and anything that happens with this variable happens among the entirety of the project.